Hello, dear friends. Today is the 17th of July, Thursday. And if you remember, I have repeatedly said that the current Hitlerian Kremlin copies even in the smallest details the tactics of his spiritual mentor Adolf Hitler, and yesterday I was convinced of this once again. Having listened to the speech, which I have already heard many times from the footage of the documentary chronicles of the Second World War, I mean the famous speech of Goebbels, which he uttered on February 18, 1943, and which was remembered by many as the speech that he proclaimed, "Do you want a total war?" In the hall, no, it was not a hall, it was a sports. Which was filled with specially selected people, was filled with delight, yes, yes. Let me remind you, this speech sounded soon after the defeat of Germany against Stalingrad. It was clear that the country was in shock, and before that, everything was fine. Restaurants were open in Berlin, in Iran, and in other big cities, cafes from all over the world. Food and drinks were delivered from all over Europe, French cognac, Madame Cliquot. North Africa was delivered with wild, previously unseen fruits. Life was successful. And the public enjoyed life. It was almost a state of all-encompassing prosperity then, and then it all crashed. It was necessary to do something. Goebbels prepared this speech. He agreed with Hitler. The point was that Lafayette was over. It was necessary to mobilize the economy completely, to turn the country into a single military camp, to close most entertainment facilities. Now everyone should understand that we are at war, and not to have fun. Let men, even those who had deadlines, call women, mobilize. In short, to spin the situation inside the country to the maximum, stop the fun and put everyone at gunpoint. And yesterday I heard something like this. But it reminded me so much and sounded like Solovinov's ashes. And it was the same important. I feel this is a breakthrough. Then it was a breakthrough when a crack broke out in Germany, by and large, when there was a serious indication that Germany would lose the war. The same thing is happening now. This memorable speech begins. It will be remembered. It will be the same speech of Goebbels, but the second series too. The speech is about Trump promising, threatening, giving 50 days. We must turn these 50 days into hell for them. This is how the main source of rags announced. Before that, it was all like that, the preparation. Now we have entered a real war. All NATO is fighting against us. There is nowhere to retreat. They want to destroy us from the face of the earth. Therefore, these 50 days, we must raise all of Africa against them. We must drive 300,000 Koreans to Ukraine. Great power, the second army of the world, unable to do anything, even liberate their own land without Koreans. And then there is a threat to put Africa against NATO. Europe must shudder. The United States must shudder and be scared of our readiness and rage, make a nuclear strike on them. Yes, let it be a nuclear war, but we have nowhere to go. Because otherwise we, well, still, in relation to us, the Russians, will be genocide. We will be destroyed. In Europe, Europe will hand over some systems to Ukraine. Therefore, those locations where there is production of these types of weapons which will be sent to Ukraine, we must mercilessly beat on them. Europe must die. The United States will weaken their defense, because Patras will be handed over and it is necessary to beat on the United States of America. Again, the topic of tactical nuclear weapons. But already so, without fanaticism, already without whips, we will throw nuclear missiles into Europe with our warheads. Somehow more modest, more restrained. But again, there is nowhere to go, what to do. By the way, then I will tell you more. Medvedev repeated this. A nuclear blow to Kremlin. Medvedev. Now what to do? In the country there is a terrible situation. In the villages you will not meet alcoholics, people who drink a lot. Why? Because they were all immobilized, sent to Ukraine, and there they are buried. There is no one to call in the villages. Therefore, I pay attention to what is happening in our large cities, Moscow, St. Petersburg. And here people are having fun, enjoying themselves. People are living their lives as if there is no war, there is no front. People do not die for them. Now the time has come and their turn has come. We need to prepare. Now mobilization will come to them. And then it fell on these smart-faced people who make smart faces, sitting at all sorts of international conferences. They speak about sanctions, about exchange, about the economy. What have you done for the front? What have you done for victory? And you are also in the trench. In short, to this day, to a considerable extent, the inner calm of the Putin regime was based on the fact that such orcs, as Solovyov said, were mobilized in the cities, in the villages, in Vesem, in Rashinsky. And in the capital, this is a historical source of danger for the ruling regimes in the Kremlin. There was life, life was the key, everyone was having fun, those who had money. Well, now that's it, now this war is coming, now they will be mobilized, now the most interesting will begin. Now it will probably increase the internal, so to speak, pressure. In general, the impression is that the person took and rewritten the speech of Himmler, remade a little the reality of modern Arkistan. Therefore, the situation is such that the person is not from this world, absolutely. What kind of Africa will he raise? What kind of Europe will be flourishing when without Koreans they can't do anything? At least he knows that for the past year, the Solovino-Pomachik, the second army that he threatens to take over the whole of Europe, that it has captured less than Luxembourg territory in Ukraine, and this despite the fact that Ukraine was hindered from fighting in every possible way. They were hindered by the leadership of Donald Trump, Republicans. They didn't give money for half a year. Half a year went by like this, the supply of weapons was decreasing. There were moments when the advantage of the number of shots by the artillery, the Gob artillery, reached 15-1 on the battlefield in favor of the orcs, in favor of the Russian armed forces. And even with all this, here is a great achievement, but I understand now the causes of their panic. It really was panic, it was hysterics. That is, now they just heard that there would be a supply of weapons in Ukraine, and they stopped everything in hysterics. We must tighten the nuts, otherwise we are all finished. This is the same. And at that time, Himmler, on February 18, 1943, shouted, "Do you want a total war?" Well, here he was sitting in the studio, but he probably imagined himself as a few thousand full of scum somewhere out there for the ore. Yes, we want this. Well, that very nuclear club of the Kremlin, Medvedev, also gave another interview, I don't know. They reported to him about my yesterday's information, which I gave him secretly on my video, that the long-range missiles which will soon enter Ukraine, and maybe among them will be Tamagavki. So the shooting in Moscow will start from home with ducks. I don't know if they reported it or not, but this time it was somehow restraining than before. He didn't flinch with a nuclear club. He said, "We won't do it yet, but if the situation worsens for us, then there will be nowhere to go." It was very restrained, semi-nuclear, so to speak, statement that if it gets worse. How many times has it happened? It got worse and what? Nothing, it will be like yesterday. He threatened, got a slap, got angry and went on. That is, there is hysterics. They don't know what to do because there are no breakthroughs on the battlefield. The front, as they say, is frozen. The only thing they can do, they do it, is massive air raids. Yes, it's terrible, the civilian population suffers. It is clear the goal. The Ukrainian soldier orc cannot win on the battlefield, so he tries to demoralize the population. As the history shows, all these mass bombings, they, in general, in both directions. And the Allies, by and large, could not achieve the victory they wanted with the help of mass bombings. It did not work to destroy the German military-industrial complex. And the Germans failed to break the people in the same Great Britain when there was a fight for the sky over this country. Once again, this beep has been hysterical for 50 days. Apparently, these terrible attacks will continue for 50 days. And I often have a question on forums, why 50 days, why so long? And they make conclusions that it's all not serious, that it's just taking time. I have to tell you, after a lot of thinking and listening, taking in the information here, that 50 days is so, by and large, for solving the problems that are already in front of us, in front of Ukraine, the armed forces of the country and its allies. The problems are so high, so complicated that, God forbid, they will be solved in 50 days. Let me remind you about the recent attack of the American-Israeli on Iran. Trump gave 60 days to the Iranians to think it over. At 65, he got angry. And these 60 days, they went to prepare an operation that was much easier than what is now to be done in Ukraine. What was there? It was necessary to prepare these flights, logistics, then identify points of anti-air defense. In short, all this preparatory work for the strike of two B-2 bombers, a complex task, but not like the one that is in front of Ukraine. And what is in front of Ukraine? And now we will talk about it. I will do it on the example of two articles that were published recently, one in the British The Times, the other in the American publication The Atlantic. And here they generally describe the situation and the ways, the solutions that are necessary for victory. Edward Luca is very famous in Britain and by all means an analyst, columnist, wrote an article, placed an article in the Times. The article is based on the recently published book published by former conservative Congressman Bob Steele, The New Total War, a speech about the war between Putin and Ukraine. Note the word total. I did not start this for nothing in comparison with the speech of Goebbels about the total war. I am meeting this term for the first time applicable to Russian aggression. Bob Steele is a strong personality. He has a fundamental education, a specialist in Russian armed forces. In general, this is both a scientist and a practitioner. The book apparently made a big impression. Plus, this is an analytical note of the former military attaché of Great Britain in Moscow by John Foreman, which he published in the New Eurasian Strategies Center. I'll tell you, you probably guess that British military attaché are very qualified people. And he expressed a number of those thoughts which still, by and large, have not been discussed in the general media. What are we talking about? About the fact that Russia, in principle, copes with the huge problems with which it first had to face aggression. Although there are also serious problems which would have already broken another country, other armed forces, but Russia is holding on. Yes, the combat spirit of the troops is low, the doctrine is outdated, the leadership is weak, if not to say very weak, the logistics are deplorable, and the decision-making is overly centralized. The Russian rulers use cheap and abundant resources, land, people, things that are extremely ill-intentioned and wasteful. But all this does not matter if, in the end, the task is still being fulfilled. It is important that the availability and merciless use of the mass of gun, meat, and firepower, including the bombardment of civilian objects using a drone planning bomb. When one of these resources is cut, they find another one within the country. Either they recruit prisoners or they pull from abroad, China, Iran, North Korea. Unlike the orcs, Ukrainian defenders fight honestly, writes the former military attaché. They are more motivated. In most cases, they are better organized and better at fighting. But there are fewer of them, so they are weaker. And this, if there is no decisive interference from outside, in the end matters, writes the former military attaché. Continuing further, before I continue further, I want to make one more remark that you should remember. I noticed changes literally in the last days, somewhere in the last week, in the tone of the Western media. In the assessment of the actions of Russia, its economic condition, its armed forces, and so on. It became a little, I would say, more hysterical in the sense that before it was, they are all teapots, they will all blow up. And now there are such that the situation is difficult, you need to wake up, get up, and this article is written by Edward Lucas, we must wake up. Then Medvedev's statements as they were published in TASS were dramatically dramatized in the Boulevard British newspapers, for example. They sounded much more threatening and sharp than he actually said. And this is due to the fact that, remember, we discussed with you, as European politicians say, we know what to do, but how to raise the people. Because we will do it, and after that we will not be elected, we will not be re-elected. Extremely right-wing supporters of Putin will come to us. That is, apparently the Western press, in any case British and American, they began to scare their people so that they would wake up. Because this is now, by and large, the main problem, maybe the main problem of the Western world. Then the author writes, NATO does not want Ukraine to lose, but if NATO is not ready to help it win, an inevitable result will be some kind of disorderly, bad situation with it. Formal ceasefire with peaceful negotiations or without, but it will be a bad situation. I told you in the previous video. Okay, let's say they pressed on Putin now, he said, I agree to a truce for 30 days. They declared a truce for 30 days, gathered in Istanbul, and again Russians threw out their maximum requirements. They said, here is our program of regulation. Do you accept it? That's it. And there, if Ukraine accepts it, that's it. Ukraine, as an independent state, disappears, so to speak. If you don't accept it, then we will continue to fight. And that's it. That is, indeed, a fatal situation awaits us, just like now. Everyone says, let's give weapons, and so on. What's next? What is the goal? He writes incorrectly. So far there is no answer to what will happen next. What is the ultimate goal? So far there is no answer to what will happen next. What is the ultimate goal? So far there is no answer to what will happen next. What is the ultimate goal? So far there is no answer to what will happen next. What is the ultimate goal? So far there is no answer to what will happen next. What is the ultimate goal? So far there is no answer to what will happen next. What is the ultimate goal? So far, there is no answer to what will happen next. What is the ultimate goal? Russia is returning to Ukraine, as the author writes, for new trophies or will switch its attention to other directions. Now, in the last days, the situation has intensified around Moldova. In any case, threats, hints, and so on were scattered in Russia. Next, by the way, it is written, Ukraine is a military center of a wider conflict. Yes, it is indeed so. This very Sullivan monument once again shouted yesterday that we are fighting against everything NATO. He does not say that it is not us, but China with our own hands, with the help of North Koreans and Iranians, is fighting against Ukraine. He says, we are the only ones fighting against NATO. Inside Russia, military propaganda strengthens the political and economic power of the country. I quote one of the craziest city people, Karaganova. She looks like Fantomas who shouts all the time that she needs to be bombed. Nuclear bombing is a man who has an apartment in Venice, in Berlin. He is not allowed to enter there by sanctions, but for some reason he is allowed to rent these apartments. In general, he is a complete idiot, so he writes, Russia is a country of warriors, it never knew how to live outside the state of war. The picture of the war is embedded in the genes of the Russians. This is complete nonsense. An old KGB agent who survived from the madness, who was primarily engaged in disinformation and holding active events, and now he's bringing this nonsense to the French journalists last month. Now he's a hawk from the encirclement of the Kremlin. Russia is a country of warriors. He is fighting for nuclear confrontation to ensure the quick victory of Russia in Ukraine. This is a strategic weapon that they wave with a blast of a nuclear club. But the author, Lucas, in conclusion, makes an interesting thought. In the end, the wars are led by nations, not by the army. The Russians are ready to take risks and sacrifices in what they consider a struggle for national survival. We, he writes, are Europeans. No, not before that, the author notes that. The military reforms in Russia since 1922 have taken place on a significant scale. This is related to the revolutionary processes of the emergence of drones, artificial intelligence. But Putin's priorities are to increase the nuclear arsenal, which is vital for the demonstration of force. This is weapon number 1, BLEF, and the modernization of conventional weapons with emphasis on unmanned systems as well as on long-range missiles. According to the estimates of the majority of experts, the full reconstruction of the Russian armed forces will take decades. By that time, the heavy program of rearmament of the European NATO will finally come to full power. With the economic size of Italy, Russia, most likely at this time controlled by Putin's contemporaries, will surely conclude a full-scale confrontation that is not attractive, but it will find other, earlier ways to create trouble. That is, they used to wait until Russia would complete the reconstruction of the armed forces. Now they say that then the situation will be less dangerous than before, because Russia will be forcing at a forced pace to create problems now until the rearmament of the European NATO has reached full scale. What will Russia do? Inside the country and abroad, Russia has revived and modernized the dirty techniques of Soviet times. This combines real murder with discrediting with the help of fake videos and stolen data. It integrates all elements of state power to achieve the goal. This is a terrible form of rule, authoritarianism, or dictatorship. But it allows it to integrate all elements of state power to achieve this narrow goal, using a cocktail of money, propaganda, court cases, banditry, which leaves the majority of Western countries confused, because it is a hybrid war with which they have never faced. And because now the West, well, Britain, I don't know how, but in the United States, I will tell you, now there are articles, finally, that is, in 150 days of reform of the new administration. Special services, intelligence, counterintelligence, such a blow has been imposed, which most likely, several of the most powerful intelligence services of the West could have imposed on them by the United States with their own forces. They themselves have achieved these outstanding results. Threats are increasing. That is the conclusion. This thought is interesting. Earlier they said that Russia would end the war with Ukraine, and then they said differently. They said that in 4 or 6, now they say 10, it will be able to restore and reconstruct its armed forces. But then it turns out that NATO has already turned on in its full program is reconstructing its armed forces in Europe. And somewhere in 10 days, NATO will earn all this for the full machine. And the difference in GDP is huge, economic power is huge. Therefore, Russia will restore, but on a significantly lower level than it will be for Europeans. Therefore, they say Russia will present its danger not in 10 years when it restores, reconstructs everything, but before that. Because at this time they will believe that Europe is not ready. Therefore, what is Lucas writing about? These threats are foggy, it is difficult to determine what will happen next. Because the war, a strange cocktail, hybrid methods and forms of work need NATO unity. And it depends on unstable policy in Europe, the mood of the citizen, which these articles scare and do right, finally. But for now, unstable policy in Europe and, attention, an unstable person in the White House. A big problem, and then he writes, many of us here in Europe have no full understanding of what is needed by all forces. Quickly, without even waiting for tomorrow, to work to contain this threat, and we stick to our positions, he writes with irony. Well, okay, box, we've heard this, we know this, but don't let this ruin our vacation. That is, vacation is sacred. The article of Lucas, from my point of view, is aimed, first of all, at a Western European citizen. As for the elites, thank God, there has already been enough certainty and clarity. There are problems with Switzerland, with Orban, but this is so. In comparison with other problems, this is solved, one way or another. As for the United States, I observe the signs that can give an understanding or a hint of how serious is the decision that Trump made, how much he understands the seriousness of this decision. Because from the point of view of analytics, logic, this is already his war, and his political, well, in general, future, resume, so to speak, his political career depends on the outcome of this war. As for him personally, the rest probably worries him little, so this is the main criterion for me, how he assesses what he does. Well, look what happened since then, after he gave the order to renew the help to Ukraine. At first, it was said that the Americans would not supply the Patriot missile system at all. They would supply the Europeans, and the Americans would compensate with the supply of these systems to Europe. Then it was said that the Americans would still put 2 of their own. For money, Europe will pay for it, but still their own. And that's it, he switched to Rubicon. America is already at war. In any case, this was perceived in the Kremlin, and this is the main thing in this case. Then this number has changed, not 2, but 5, as several American sources write. Trump called Mertz and said that we are ready to put 5 systems for which you will naturally pay. And then, in general, a number flashed. They began to call 17. I don't know where it came from, 17. It requires clarification, maybe the total number that they want Ukraine to have was 17. I told you about the magic number 12, which, from the point of view of Russian military leaders, is critical. Because less than 12 is much easier to bomb Ukraine from the air. But if 12 is more, this is a serious problem. I am not sure about 17, but the fact that from 0 it went 2 and then 5, this already says that in Trump's head, the offense does not even calm down, but on the contrary, in my opinion, it is sharpened. In general, they say that Trump is an evil man. It is not so easy for him to get under the skin, as the Americans have the expression under the skin. In my opinion, Putin managed to do this. Therefore, in my opinion, to this day, it stirs Trump's soul, does not cause him a restless sleep. An unprecedented thing happened the other day. 2 reconnaissance planes took off from different bases in Great Britain, and one flew over Norway and there to the Russian northwest, just to the place where the Russian submarines on the eve of the Third World War, nuclear submarines must try to enter the Atlantic Ocean. This famous, well-known in NATO military circles, triangle, which must be controlled in order not to allow access to the open space of these Russian submarines with nuclear warheads. And the second, he flew over Germany, along the Baltic Sea, along the borders of Germany, Poland, and there. Somewhere like that where Karelia, Kaliningrad, St. Petersburg, very remarkable flights. So there was never such a thing, and here it is again. And this is after Trump's decision. These are small things that allow you to assume that the work is carried out, and it is growing. By the way, these 2 flights, American and British reconnaissance aircraft, coincided with approximately the same flights of American reconnaissance aircraft, only this time to the borders closer to Iran. That is 2 points, and their serious work is carried out, and this flight is really serious work. This is preparation for a serious event. In case if there is a little man with a house with ducks, they really plan to do something bad. Well, and then what to do? In fact, people in the United States are breaking their heads what to do. Because I would say so on the basis of your own experience of work in general, professional, and in the United States in particular. If you want to do something here, you need to have a constant presence here. You need to have a group of people who will only deal with this issue. Americans call this task force. And their people should have the authority to communicate with various ministries, departments, other countries, and solve the issue quickly, directly, like in wartime. This is not the case in ordinary civilian conditions. And if all this goes according to the usual as in civilian conditions, then, well, yes, there will be deliveries, what was promised. It will take some time, but it will take more time than you can afford, and in short, it can end in nothing, just pshik, and that's it. That is, an organization is needed. Professional people with relevant powers must work there, and now there is no such organization in Washington, and this is a critically important problem. Trump, for 150 days of his leadership, made such a blow, together with Musk and others, on the state apparatus as a whole, on its foreign policy and the power unit in particular. So many professionals were fired that now they are breaking their heads. And who will do this? The National Security Council. It was specifically historically created for this case, so that in any situation when a hot spot arises, a hot problem, there is already a group of people who can potentially get involved in the full program. In solving the relevant issues, there is practically no such thing. They fired wolves. Along with them, about 100 more people were fired because they allegedly leaked the information. The information is leaked further. In particular, the question of Trump to Zelensky during the conversation like, "Are you ready to attack Moscow and St. Petersburg or not?" It was a slip, and it was not a slip of friends of Ukraine. It was a slip of people who did not want this to work further. They wanted to blow up the whole issue. Therefore, Trump had nothing left to do. When I asked him about the BBC, they gave him such a permission. He said, "I didn't give anything, I don't know anything," and so on. That is, he does not have the Security Council. Then Pentagon appointed this Hexit. Well, it's a nightmare, it's just a nightmare. Then this nightmare already managed to do with such a thing. That is, they made a fool of God to pray. He was told there to fix some distortions. When this program was in effect, that it is necessary to include representatives of various beep directions, to take to work different races and all that stuff. But he turned on and he worked. The entire top, by and large, was fired. Professional Pentagon. Many places are still not occupied, and this moron is sitting there, and he does not know what to do. The intelligence of the community. Tulsi, who Solovyov called on the eve of her appointment, our girlfriend. I will explain what a girlfriend is in American. This is not a friend, this is not just a friend. Here, when Americans become adults, well, they meet a guy with a girl, and then they actually start a civil marriage. That is, a girlfriend is actually the one with whom the American has, that is, consists of civil legal relations. They live with each other. That's why girlfriend sounds in this case much deeper and wider than it could be imagined. So this is girlfriend, the latest news. She is now engaged in a project. They made some kind of software so that all information and all 18 agencies of the United States of America and intelligence entered the center, absolutely all of them. And you think, why is this needed to improve the analysis of the situation? She will write the analysis that Trump will tell her now. Recently, she has already done such a thing. There is a threat to Iran's creation of nuclear weapons. She needs this in order to analyze, to identify in the intelligence community of the United States of America employees who are not loyal to Trump. That is, she is going, this is already a leak. These people who work already know, they know that now they will start hunting for witches, like in the Soviet Union. Well, otherwise, but similar in 1937, 1939. That is, this is demoralization of the personal composition. This is incredible idiotism. This means that instead of intelligence work, they will be engaged in searching. Are you ready to kiss him here in this place or not? I'm ready, says Tulsi. And you, who are not ready, raise your hands. Tomorrow everyone will be fired. That is, some kind of nightmare is just going on. This is evidence that the person has no idea what she should do, what this function consists of. And therefore, as from her point of view, it is possible to enter this situation. It is necessary to climb, it is necessary to climb, and in this way, this climbing compensates for its full professional inability. This is what the situation here is like, and in order to solve the issues with the supply of weapons, you sometimes need to show miracles. Because 33 years after the end of the Cold War, the military-industrial complex of the United States came to a significant decline. In the 90s, in the first 5 years after the collapse of the Soviet Union, the turnover and the order package of only one company, Raytheon, It went to the top 3, now it goes to the top 3, the largest fell by about 40%, that is, it was a crash. And so far it has stopped somewhere. You really need enthusiasts of your business who have to deal with the situation. In the Atlantic edition, I talked about it, from one of the oldest analytical and intellectual editions in the United States of America. There was an article by Thomas Wright, who in the Biden administration was the senior director of the National Security Council on strategic issues and entered the group that was engaged in Ukraine. And here is his article, which is called "Putin Must Believe That He Cannot Win." He writes what needs to be done and how to do it. And here is the main thing, his thoughts. It is immediately clear that he is a professional, he knows his job. Now he works at the Burkina Institute, the analytical center. And based on his work experience, he offers what and how to do it. The situation is such, he writes, that in order to make Putin go to serious, really serious negotiations, in any case, the parties will go to mutual compromises, but it must be a fair world. That is, for this, the path to such a peace agreement lies through changes in the battlefield. In the battlefield, not even the supply of weapons, not the sanctions, but precisely the result of all this, changes in the battlefield. So Trump declares the rigidity of politics against Russia, allowing the sale, planning, and so on, but often his statements remain declarative. So far, we have recorded in my previous segment of this video that it seems that he is getting more and more inside him, that is, he is ready to go further. The aim of the Kremlin is to use the conflict to achieve the maximalist goals. This is the present time. By the way, yesterday, or not today, this morning I listened to an interview of one of the former American diplomats in Kiev. A very, very smart person who knows what he is talking about. But the idea is that Putin's victory cannot be allowed in any way. It will be a catastrophe for the whole world. Russia must lose. But this is also dangerous, he says, because after that there will surely be a collapse of Russia. And this, well, you all know, is a bit risky, dangerous, and so on. Therefore, we must make sure that Putin and Russia lose the war with Ukraine, and then we must help Russia not to fall apart. Just as they did after the end of the Cold War, after the collapse of the Soviet Union. And she even expressed the idea that maybe for this you will have to organize the Marshall Plan. That is, now there are people there in the US State Department who think that after the victory over Russia, they will organize the Marshall Plan. Is it really that they do not have more acute and important immediate issues that require a decision now, rather than a dream and not thinking about this Marshall Plan after the victory of Ukraine over Putin? Further, the code of thought of Mr. Wright. The victory of Ukraine is possible only with sustainable and long-term support in the West, including the supply of critically important weapons and the strengthening of the sanctions on Russia. A brilliant thesis. The key to change will change the dynamics of the war. Putin must be convinced that he will not have military success in Ukraine. And now he has no such thoughts. He hopes that there will be, therefore he continues what he continues. In order to convince him of this, concrete changes are needed on the battlefield. Effective support requires the creation, we move on to the main question, of a specialized team in the White House, capable of focusing on solving supply problems and coordinating the assistance of allies. Relying, for example, on groups in Ukraine during the Biden era. And what is proposed in this regard? The author again and again emphasizes his main idea, not new supplies of weapons, mainly anti-aircraft weapons. Neither sanctions will be able to convince Putin that he will not be able to achieve victory, new conquests in Ukraine. To this conclusion, he must come or can go only as a result of the change in the situation on the battlefield. And for this, it requires coordinated efforts. Trump has still said that he is not for those, he is not for these. He is, as it were, an arbiter on top. Well, he is an arbiter, he wants a Nobel Prize. The author suggests that what position can Trump take, a normal position that will be beneficial in Ukraine and at the same time does not contradict his previous statement. He can present his policy as a creation of conditions on the battlefield in Ukraine necessary for the conclusion of a peaceful agreement. I would recommend to Ukrainian diplomats to remember this formula for a conversation with contacts from the United States of America, from the State Department, the White House, and personally with Trump, I swear to you, he doesn't have this idea in his head yet. He constantly thinks about what to do with it. And here, please, Mr. President, you have to do all this in order to create conditions on the battlefield to achieve a peaceful agreement, as a result of which you will receive a Nobel Prize, and to create conditions means to break the course of events on the battlefield, and it is necessary, roughly speaking, to kick back and very strongly, a gorge on the same battlefield. It reminds, for example, so that you understand, it is also interesting, what they have achieved and what the same group can do now if it is created. Under the administration of Trump, in January of the 23rd year, they calculated and then, remember, it was preparing for the spring counteroffensive of the Soviet Union. They calculated that for this large counteroffensive, Ukraine will need about 750,000 shells of the 155th caliber. And the problem was that the United States did not have anything like this, and it was close. The United States then produced only about 14,000 shells a month, which would be enough for a couple of days. That was it. What did they do? They rushed to South Korea and started negotiations. By the way, I told you about this story a few months before that. General Gavrilov from Kiev came there with the same request. He was told no, so he left. The Americans started talking in their own way, in a good way, of course, with South Korea. South Korea says, this is our dream, we want to become a major supplier, but we have such laws, we cannot supply a warring country. What to do then? How? One of the options is that the Koreans supply to the Americans. Somewhere there, in some location of the Americans, they erase all these serial numbers on each shell so that it would not be visible its South Korean origin. It turns out to be unreal. They come up with one, another, third, and finally found the options, and these shells went. A significant number. They got to the point that China managed to get about 50,000 artillery shells for the old Soviet model of weapons. It's not a simple situation either. Then the PVO system. The Europeans were told to supply their PVO systems, and we will supply them to you in a while. As soon as we produce new ones, we will supply you with new ones. We have agreed with Israel. Israel is the system that they would like to change to a new one. The Israelis will supply Ukraine. Then the shells and ammunition for the same patriots. There was a law, there was a whole line, and Ukraine, if it had become a line, had been waiting for these shells for a long time. They turned this whole story, this scheme, with these laws, with the line, and put it in the wrong line. In short, as you can see, if there was not this group, if it all went as it should go in peace in ordinary times, then these issues would have been solved for another 10 years. And in the current conditions, not only 10, but maybe another 20 years. Therefore, this is what is needed urgently. One of the problems of Trump, writes the author, is that his Ministry of Defense consciously refuses to carry out his new policy. His new policy is that we will help Ukraine, and the Ministry of Defense, it turns out, has some kind of its own. Well, this Colby is sitting there. There is such a thing in the American system. When a person legally occupying his place, he says, but Baba Yaga disagrees. In principle, I believe that it is impossible to prepare all this for China itself. Now there is a special envoy, Kellogg, but Kellogg is associated with the State Department. He does not work in contact with the Pentagon, but with the State Department. And now, first of all, the Pentagon came out. In the Pentagon, when Biden was not there, I told him once that the time would come with tears in his eyes, namely, the kind grandfather of Biden. There were good people there who were good to Ukraine. Now they are not. They have been cleared out. But there is an option here. There is an option. Kellogg, he is associated with the State Department. Rubio is now both the Secretary of State and an assistant to the President on national security. Maybe we should create this group, as the author says, include Kellogg there, put him as the head of this group, as the coordinator, include specialists there. And there is another option, as the author writes, a number of supporters of Trump in Ukraine. Are there such among the Republicans, both with Trump, America First, and for Ukraine? They remain outside the government. They took them, well, not only they were not taken because they sympathize with Ukraine, maybe not because of that, but because, well, it's a mess, it's a mess. So many people were fired, then the State Department, there is a huge number of unoccupied places. In the Pentagon, the same thing, and they fired key people, not Eljap Kina, of course. So the author gives an idea. There are many such people who have not yet been taken into the administration. They would like to go there, and they know what to do, how to make their contribution to the realization of victory. The victory of the Trump plan. Now this is the plan of Trump's victory. To create conditions in Ukraine on the battlefield in order to achieve a fair, peaceful agreement on the basis of this. Well, we understand what it means to create changes on the battlefield. What else does the author specifically say? The author could conclude an agreement with Kiev by exchanging, for example, the access of the USA to intellectual property on new Ukrainian technology of unmanned aerial vehicles. And exchange this access to this technology, to the access of Ukraine to the projects of American weapons and anti-aircraft defense systems. That is, Ukraine will reveal its technology of these aircraft, and then the USA and Ukraine could jointly produce unmanned aircraft, including at the US factories. I think this is a brilliant idea. Well, what to sit on these technologies now, like a dog on a haystack, when the question of whether to be or not to be a state is being solved. If the question arises that we are creating a joint enterprise at the plants of the United States, and for this Ukraine provides its technology, the secrets of its technology, and the United States and everything else, then why not? Then, the Trump team could return South Korea to this process and ask Seoul to provide Ukraine with space assistance in the supply of artillery supplies in exchange for the help of Ukraine in the development of anti-missile technology, and South Korea will need it very much because Russia will certainly transfer its unmanned technology to North Korea, and soon these unmanned aircraft will become a big problem for South Korea. As the author emphasizes, there is a situation that Ukraine in the field of unmanned technology is now on the front lines in the world, and both the United States and other Western allies and South Korea and Japan could benefit from the Ukrainian experience in the field of countering these aircraft. In conclusion, Putin will stop only when he is fully convinced that his wishes are unreachable. The sooner Ukraine and its partners are able to demonstrate this to the Kremlin, the sooner this war will end. That's the thought, gentlemen. Well, as you understand, in this situation, a particularly important role is playing. Here, Mr. Wright discussed what the administration of the United States can do here in Washington, but the role of Ukraine should also be here. As we have said, we should not just go and ask, we should promote ideas. Develop them and offer solutions, not ask, but offer. And in this sense, the ambassador of Ukraine of the United States of America should play a very important role. I told you in one of the videos what a colossal historical, critically important role the Ambassador Benjamin Franklin played in the history of the United States, who was sent to the court of Louis XVI in order to ask for money for the war for the independence of the American colony from the British Crown. Well, he completed his mission, the other ambassador failed, and he completed his mission in such a way that he bankrupted the royal treasury. The king had to raise taxes within the population, within the country, and there were no harvest years. The people were starving. The revolution of the king's overthrow ended. And with chopped heads of both Ludovico and his wife, Queen Marie Antoinette, and thanks to this, Augustine's wives, the rulers of France, sacrificed their lives and heads to achieve the independence of the United States, otherwise the whole money would not have been from anywhere else. This is the kind of role it can have. Well, you don't just have to work with chopped heads, but the ambassador of Ukraine to the United States should play such a critical role now. Well, the last thing is the talks here. Ambassador Markarova will soon, apparently, leave the United States of America. Umarov was planning to take her place. The talks went for about a week. Umarov here in Washington tried to reach the Minister of Defense Hexet, but he didn't pick up the phone. It was already a black mark. In general, Umarovo is in the security forces, including in the Pentagon, but also in the special services. Well, to put it mildly, diplomatically, they don't like it very much. They even came up with a nickname for him, Kebab. And now they say that the Americans have sent a signal that they will not welcome Umarovo as an ambassador. Well, Umarovo is not. Who is it? It would seem in Ukraine. Let me remind you that Ukraine is one of the 3 republics of the Soviet Union, which during the Soviet Union was represented in the Organization of Bionic Nations. Ukraine, if I'm not mistaken, is one of the founders of the Organization of Bionic Nations, in the sense that it was present at the first meeting of the founders of the UN, and always was a permanent representative of Ukraine. That is, the ancient history of the diplomatic work of Ukraine since the Soviet Union. Well, it would seem that the school should already be, it is, and there should be specialists. And now what do specialists need? Diplomats, professionals. And it is also advisable that those who would be engaged would be experts in military strategic problematics to solve all these issues that I have now listed. And here come the latest news that allegedly the candidate for the post of new ambassador is Olga Stefanishina. Well, when I heard this, I was a little scared, because if this is the case, then this, I will say, gentlemen, is, by and large, a diversion. The ambassador is a face, a business card and a face, well, theoretically, of the whole country, but it is precisely the authorities who appoint. This ambassador, the authorities, that is, she or someone else, it will be the face, the business card, the authority who sits in Kiev. And what does this card have for itself in its background? A stable reputation of a person who was closely associated with the well-known Portnov, on which, as they say, the Kremlin is not to be put anywhere. Well, plus they say an open criminal case, again associated with some kind of fraud, again some kind of crap, some kind of filth. And the question arises, no, now they can tell me that the case will now be closed and that it is not quite so unambiguous. It is possible to find hundreds of words, thousands of words in order to say that it will all come together. But again, you understand it will be a business card. This ambassador is a person who must completely trust the head of state who sends him. I don't know who sends Zelensky or Yermak, but it turns out that the one who sent him satisfies the person who was closely associated with Portnov, and they person who has a criminal case. As far as I understand, it was said from sources, usually from informants who are not mistaken from Kiev, that the criminal case is open. Now the question is, maybe the open criminal case is the deep meaning of this reason, for which this person was appointed. Because it is always easy for a person who has a criminal case to be controlled, but you understand that it is easy for them to be controlled. They think of Bankova, it is easy for them to be controlled. Well, why would Moscow not ask this question, and so on? First of all, the reputation is one thing. Secondly, I am not sure that she has the appropriate qualifications. And thirdly, this one, like a wet sword, criminal case. In short, I can tell you for sure, people here are thinking about what to do, what steps to take to make it work. All this is good. But this appointment, personally, I would sit here with the State Department. I would evaluate it as, excuse me, they either do not understand what they are doing, or they do not care at all what qualification the person who is here in Washington will be. The main thing is that he is under control of someone, the main person in Kiev. Or in this connection, it is remembered the appointment of this sexologist in the country of NATO and Bulgaria, if I'm not mistaken. Pasha Rybakin, a great diplomat who was sent to another key country for Ukraine in the current conditions, China and so on. That is, what is it? Is it a nonsense, or is it a price-guided, subversive action directed against the interests of the state? That's what I don't know, gentlemen. Let's discuss together, write to me what you think about this. But for now, dear friends, as you understand, the work is being carried out. So far, it is growing, the processes are going on. The rockets, they are not just talking, you will hear about it soon. Germany is waiting for a few hundred long-range missiles. You will soon learn about British rockets, which were made completely new, according to good characteristics. But they have such characteristics as rockets, which are about 10, 20 times more expensive than those that the British have produced now. In addition, for Ukraine, it will be completely free. Other shells are being prepared, that is, the mechanism is launched. Apparently, Trump in any case does not calm down, he is really offended. And his wife, the First Lady, apparently, she understands the situation correctly. That is, she understands the strategic interests, and her husband may be better than he is, and the United States in America. Therefore, gentlemen, in these conditions, glory to Ukraine and its armed forces, the enemy will be defeated, victory will be ours. To you, friends, courage, firm faith in our inevitable victory. The pale MOL must understand that it will not reach the battlefield of those goals that this pale MOL sets. Therefore, it is not for nothing that they are now invading there and you are ready for a total war. As practice shows, this total war did not help the Third Reich, and the very appearance of this speech is evidenced by the fact that they are there in the Kremlin. They already understand that life cracked, as Lev Zadov said, a famous opera worker represented by Nestor Ivanovich Makhno. Therefore, dear friends, endurance, courage, and firm faith in our undeniable victory. See you soon.